All right. Well, thank you for joining us. This is the Phoenix Film Revival Podcast, episode 3. Tonight we are featuring Wildrootage, Jenny, and her show that's coming up very soon. First Friday of April.
Yay.
Yeah. So here we go.
Hi.
So we have a show going, and it's very, very much based around plants. Title's Uncultivated. Do you want to kind of elaborate on what that's about?
Plants.
Sweet. Well, that was episode 3.
Yes.
So, thanks for joining us.
It's kind of a loaded question.
Well, how long have you been interested in being a conservationist?
Conservation within the past 5 or 6 years, especially moving out here to Arizona. It's like I'm from Virginia and everything is pretty much bulldozed over anyways. We hardly have any public lands that you can recreate on. So moving out here where half the state of Arizona is designated as public lands was like mind-blowing to me. So being able to go outside, explore, camp, backpack, an hour from my house was amazing. And kind of, I've always been into plants ever since I was a kid. I would tear apart flowers to look at.
What kind of plants? Puff, give plants?
Yeah.
That's what everybody asked me when I got my horticulture degree. They're like, are you going to California to grow weed? I'm like,
grow the super weed?
Yeah. Are you going to go make money in Colorado? No, but I mean, I would tear things apart, like flowers, to look at how they worked on the inside. And I graduated high school and kind of thought about, well, I don't want to go do anything that I don't have any passion for. So I thought, what's a way to help people and be doing what I'm interested in? And that was, first it was ethnobotany, which is like plants and people. So figuring out how people use plants throughout history and kind of connecting that way. But now being out here, realizing that public lands are being developed on and demolished and sold off to people to build condos kind of makes you want to stand up for, the places that you go hike and backpack and that we depend on. I think people don't make that connection like we used to, which kind of goes back to my, the name Wildrootage. It comes from Aldo Leopold, and he was a conservationist, ecologist. In his book, he basically refers to the idea that no matter how civilized we get, we still all have a piece of us that goes back to our wild roots that depends on the land. And we've definitely lost that connection, I think, where there's a big veil between us and realizing that we need that land. We need plants. Like, we need ecosystems. We need clean air, clean water. And uncultivated is showing people how alive the desert can be, specifically here. And it's all native plants. So it's not like, oleanders that you can grow in Michigan. It's actually things that are here in the desert. To show people, like, we have these things, and we need to keep them safe. We don't need to turn every single acre under.
Right.
Are there certain plants that come across that, these native plants that only grow here in the desert and the Sonoran Desert?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
tons. And we have a specific list of Arizona rare plants.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and another good thing about Arizona is there's actually protected plants. So you have your Arizona native plant laws. You have to notify if you're going to move a saguaro, touch a saguaro for any reason. And there's a whole list of plants that are restricted salvage. So yeah, there's things that are very unique to the Sonoran Desert.
What at what point did you start photographing and basically documenting?
Really, when I started being an avid hiker, because I was out there seeing things and I wanted to know what they were. And having a background in horticulture and, botany and things, it's just this is really cool. And there's some really strange plants out there. And I like really weird, stuff. And again, ethnobotany, wondering what, native peoples did with those plants.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd want to know. Actually, I really like to eat things outside. So yeah, I would always look for plants that I can eat or like make things out of. So I was the same way when I lived in Virginia. I was always looking for flowers that I could eat or like. But yeah, there's so much stuff here, like prickly pear. Like you know, eat the petals. You can eat the fruit. Ironwood. You can eat the flowers. They taste like really floral sprouts. Yeah. But there's so many things that people don't know. Like chia grows here, like chia seeds, like chia pets.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's here in the desert. Like you hike the McDowell Mountains and you can see chia plants everywhere.
Are there any mind-altering plants that are only specific to the... it's educational. It's for purposes. I mean, I'm asking for a friend.
People got to know.
Peyote's technically not native to here, but it does grow here now, so it's kind of naturalized. That's one of them. That's probably the biggest one. But there's things that we don't know, and that's another thing. Is there's so little that's been recorded, which is another thing I'm interested in. Is like documenting these things and figuring it out, and like kind of being an Indiana Jones, Lara Croft type thing.
What percentage of the plants do you think we do have on record?
I'm actually surprised by it because for the East Coast and for like the South, there's field guides and handbooks that are like 3 inches thick documenting all the plants out there. But here, there's not a ton. Like California has a guide like that, but Arizona and the Sonoran, it's kind of limited that I've found. So it's more documented than I thought, but still not to the depth of other places.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. So it kind of gives you that cool feeling of like, I can find something new and like name something after somebody. Like it's really
some potential there.
Yeah.
When you photograph these plants, do you prefer the digital or I know we'll get into the awesome alternative process that you do, but working with film, you dig it more, or is digital just more like so you can document and file it away? Or because it seems like obviously some of the work that you do is definitely more artistic than, I mean, you're just not documenting the flowers, but what do you get out of film that's like super cool?
I think I first started taking pictures of things with my phone. Because I was out, like backpacking or hiking, and I didn't want to do like Jose does and take an RZ.
Right.
I'm lazy and it's really heavy.
You're already taking your phone. Might
You're
as well.
backpacking and trying to be light, so
he takes an RZ hiking.
Yeah.
You guys got.
It's super impressive.
I had to carry my tripod
dedication.
Once. He was my mule.
Wow. Hey guys, that's the psychopath. What it does? I mean,
passion.
Anything for the shot.
But yeah, I would take them on my phone. And then really this season has been insane with wildflowers.
Oh.
And so, it's driven me to do macro. Because usually, hiking, you don't see a lot of small, tiny, like you do. But the flowers that have come out this year, I wanted to capture like how magnificent that stuff is close up. Because there are flowers literally smaller than a dime. And you can't get that, with your phone. I tried with like a hand loop, but it wasn't cutting it. So film I wanted to do because slide film is amazing. So the color and the vibrancy of slide film matches so closely with real life that was kind of my drive to be able to like show people. And if you're going to show them, make it that wow factor, make it that wow, that is the true color of that flower out there on the side of the mountain.
When it's developed right? Yeah.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Even when it's a little off.
Don't want to pull it too much. Yeah. I mean,
the color's pretty good.
So the film allows you to shoot macro, and then obviously a slide film. You're going to be showing slides.
Yeah, I have 32, I think. Almost everything out of a 36 shot roll.
Roll.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
What type of film was that?
Provia 100F.
Nice. Got some good color on that.
I think it was difficult for me with film and macro because you don't have the instant gratification of going, oh yeah, I got that in focus. So the whole roll was kind of a gamble.
Yeah.
Especially with how windy it's been, and I'm too impatient to use a tripod when I'm hiking. Yeah. So it was, well, here goes nothing, and hoping that I was really excited that everything came out pretty good. If it's not super sharp, it's pretty close.
Yeah, I think you got some pretty good shots off of that.
I did borrow a Fuji XTI with a Nikon macro, again from Jose, and that was really fun. But again, it didn't match the color. So I went with the slide.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's good. It's amazing. And it was definitely easier to do. And I could see if I got the shot,
That one's digital.
Yeah. The XTI is digital, which I ended up using, I think, 1 or 2 of those shots for the show. Yeah, it's just lends a little bit easier to making negatives that way for cyanotypes to have digital negatives.
Do you want to talk more on the process
for cyanotypes?
Yeah.
Technically, or
well, let me ask. First of all, why do you prefer the cyanotypes?
I'm impatient. No, I love them. I did them when I was a kid, honestly, in the mountains in Virginia. I would take leaves and sticks, and my mom bought me a pack of that sun paper that's like pre-prepared, and you just put it out in the yard. And I was a little kid when I first did them, and then we did a show for the up close in the drive-through gallery, and I was thinking, well, what can I do? Because like everybody does the same things. Like, no offense, but like film photography, yeah, okay, and I wanted to do something a little different, a little more eye-catching. And like I said, I'm impatient. And so I did Polaroids, which is the epitome of being impatient. And then
Polaroids, that's film.
And then cyanotypes, I thought back to, when I was a kid and making those. And so I looked into the actual process instead of the prepared paper that comes off of Amazon or something, So I got into the chemistry and learning how to mix chemistry and coating paper and figuring out what paper works best. And I just think it's like a cool magic trick. You put it out in the sun and then you slide it in the water and you just see this cool image. It's like when you put a print, developing it in the darkroom. Yeah. It's magic. You see this image come out of something, but to have made it with the sun just makes it cool for me because I'm a nature geek. So
do you shoot differently knowing that you're going to create a cyanotype?
Yeah.
As opposed to...
Absolutely. I try to do more contrasty, almost silhouetted type things, which is just my personal style or preference, I think, because a lot of people will do cyanotypes like a darkroom print. They'll make it, where you watch your midtones and you nail it. And that's, I like the way they look when I love that deep, deep Prussian blue that you get. So having that with something really contrasted like flowers just make cyanotypes so beautiful, I think. But yeah, I'll look for, especially with what I did for the show, like a light background with a silhouetted plant, or I have a bright white flower with like kind of dappled rock sunlight behind it, with rocky sort of background. You definitely do keep that in mind because that you're going to be making that negative out of it. And cyanotype negatives, to me, the way I prefer them, like I know I have to do it a certain way to get what I'm looking for.
Nice. That's interesting. I actually would never have thought of shooting a high contrast. Basically, it's a high contrast sort of shot.
Kind of high key, sort of. Yeah.
For because you mentioned that shooting Provia gets you closer to the real color than. I guess you can sit there and try to Photoshop your photograph all day and try to get it in, but when you get to shoot cyanotype, they're basically just different shades of blue, right?
And it makes it really hard to make, like, to see in your head what that final outcome is going to be without having done it a lot. For me anyways, because when you have a black and white image, you have all those gray tones and you have all that different value to it. But I don't think that's, I don't like cyanotypes that just look like a print in blue. You know what I mean? Yeah. I want it to look like a cyanotype. I want it to look like something different. I don't want a picture of the woods with a road, or like a landscape picture or something. Yeah. So I think it's subject for me. And then like you have to see those values before you make that print, because it changes. Like you don't have as much play. You don't have that whole spectrum of like white to black to, I guess you could, but it definitely doesn't represent the same way as like a black and white darkroom print. It's definitely not containing all the same values. So to know that you're not going to get the details that you would either, like you can with a direct contact black and white glass negative or something, possibly. But for me, I know like you won't get those crazy sharp details. You're not going to get this like perfect, super, clean image, which I don't like nobody anyways.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
Nobody.
Danny knows. Danny knows what that means.
That's like again back to the up close show that we did. Part of mine section of that was wabi sabi, and forgive me if I butchered that pronunciation, but like it's the Japanese idea of beauty and imperfection. So like if you have a broken vase, you fix it with gold and it makes this like beautifully imperfect thing.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And this like or they take used objects, like things that are really worn, like a handle on a coffee mug, and they'll gild it in gold, or they'll, and I think like the same thing with cyanotypes. That's kind of the cool thing, is they're not this pristine, super perfect, like it's an old process. It's right. So old. And to be able to still do that today, and it's so simple, and make really neat looking prints, I'm just into it.
Yeah, took a look at some of those today. I haven't really explored cyanotypes as much, and then I saw a couple of the test prints that you were doing today, and I'm like, why haven't I been doing this?
I think they're so beautiful.
Before.
That blue is awesome.
Yeah, and it's again, it really, I even like those edges that are like.
That's another thing. Like most people from my understanding, you would tape off edges to make perfect, like squared off. Yeah, but I love the brush strokes. I love like
it's part of the character
painting. Yeah, to me, it's the creativity, especially with cyanotypes. It's almost painterly. Yes. You do your brush strokes and you're creative with it. And when we did the workshop, that's what was so fun to watch, was people being creative about it, not perfectionists. And they were like learning like what, light goes through bird bones more than it does like a deer's jawbone. So like seeing, because they're different densities. So you're playing with ultraviolet light, and from the sun, and just seeing people be creative and learn from it, and like not trying to strive to nail this perfect image.
Yes.
Was really like heartwarming for me.
Yeah, I definitely do think that, I think especially with the work that you're doing, it's more impactful than, as you were saying, a pretty picture of a flower, or again, clean images of of nature.
Right. It might as well just shoot it with digital if you're going to go that route. Right?
Yeah, and print it at the Costco or something like that, as opposed, again, it's handmade.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, again, no offense to anyone that does landscape photography, but if you just take, a landscape shot of 4 peaks and slap it on a cyanotype, I'm not impressed. Like,
we don't like landscape photographers here. I'm kidding. Joke.
But yeah,
come on,
to do it creatively. And now if you take that picture of 4 peaks and do, again, something high key or low key, or it's something very dramatic, or you make that, and instill some sort of twist or creativity, that I can see. But cyanotypes, like you said, it's like this hand done process. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like throwing on a wheel, to make a vase or a bowl. It's something like a little more tactile for me. I don't know how to explain it. Like
more
I
organic,
said,
it seems.
yeah.
From my viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's again handmade for the most part.
So for me to like play with those values to see like how deep I can get that Prussian blue or the contrast between the two, and to see where highlights fall on things and what lines in those flower petals show up and which ones don't. I think it's a whole mental process to figure that out.
What, and I'm not trying to, get you inside somebody's head or anything like that, but what do you think, or what do you hope people will get from the cyanotype instead of inkjet or even a silver gelatin print? What do you hope that impact overall makes an observer or somebody that goes through the gallery? Is there like a specific feeling that you want them to get from that? Is it, or
I think people do. I think like weirdly they just do because it's cyanotypes and hardly anybody does them. So immediately what I've noticed is people are like, what is that? And they look at it and people don't see cyanotypes, even on Instagram. Like I tried to, connect with people and it's like Latin American countries, the Netherlands, and like, I think one dude in like Hong Kong or something. Like there's not a ton of people even throughout the world that still do this, at least, in either that are Instagrammers, right. It could be like, some 60-year-old lady in England that doesn't post anything.
Yeah.
But I think it's
not as familiar with that.
I think it's just really different to begin with. But I like, for me, just that Prussian blue and the way they look, and they're just
it's like a brand new pair of blue jeans.
Gorgeous.
That's the feeling I get.
I mean, and it may or may not have been like the Pantone color of the year, like a few years ago. So. But yeah, just I think in representing the desert in a different way and plant life specifically, you can go to the Arts and Crafts Fair in Fountain Hills and see people's wildflower pictures booth after booth, or the superstitions, or, I mean, you see that repeatedly. But to represent, these species in a different light, in a different way, like that's already eye-catching for people, but then to go, well, what is this? And then talk about it and show people, so just bringing attention to those special things that are here to help people understand that.
Even those cyanotypes, though, they're even technically like one of a kind, right? Because you can't replicate exactly one print to the next. Aside from the if you had a negative and you wanted to do like registration marks, like a screen print or something, you could, but even then your exposure can change and it could be a little, lighter of a shade or darker of a shade. Yeah.
If you don't nail the exact same exposure every time, which I guess you could with a UV table, but that's again, another thing I like is doing it in the sun because it's different, 5 minutes later to 10 minutes later, you're dealing with something, a different light.
You have characteristics in the brush strokes and the density and the paper itself too. I mean,
so unless you're gonna do like those, perfectly registered taped off borders then yes, every single one is different from the next.
And of course you teach people how to do this.
Started to.
Yeah. You had your workshop and it was pretty successful. I think it was very educational. Yeah,
it was like I said, it was really, the best part was watching everyone be creative. I went through the history of cyanotypes and how it started, which, was a guy that was a chemist and an astronomer. He kind of was interested in the way that sun plays with those chemicals. So it, was a crossover of his world, but then a female botanist picked it up and did a whole book on like British algae. So Anna Atkins. And then, so I was going through the history and people kind of were a little glazed over during that part. No offense to anybody that took the workshop, but you could see the shift when they started creating and when they started arranging flowers on the paper, or like I said, bones, and that, creating something of their own and getting outside and watching that chemistry change colors. And they were so interested in like, well, when is it ready? How do you know? Like, what's the color? What's the time? I'm like, you got to make a judgment call. Like, it's your own. So the first time, the first print, you make 2 in the workshop, and the first one's kind of a science experiment, to figure out tones. And then the next one, I had them call it themselves, timing and all that kind of stuff. So, but seeing people be so excited about seeing their results when they put it in the water, and then like you can use hydrogen peroxide to immediately oxidize the prints so they turn dark blue, like super quick. And that was like showing kids a magic trick. It was really fun because it's fun for me every time I do it. I'm like, this is cool. Science, chemistry.
The thing I brought up was that you don't really necessarily need to be a photographer to create them. It's hands-on, and it's not something that anybody could really do.
I would say like 85 to 90% of all the cyanotypes that you see, even when you Google it, is like Anna Atkins. It's botanical. It's taking pressed plants and making photograms. So there's not a ton of people doing cyanotype stuff with negatives. Mm-hmm. There's like people that will cut up negatives and like almost make like a mixed media piece, and they'll paint and they'll do acrylic and stuff like that. But you don't see a lot of people doing a lot with just negatives.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess you need a big fat negative to get an 8x10 or.
Yeah. And making bigger negatives is, it's like screen printing t-shirt shops have that paper, and then like a lithograph store I found in like Michigan or something has it. But.
So you have to create a contact negative first. You can't do an enlargement sort of piece, right?
No. And you can't like project from an enlarger.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to have like contact print.
You need a lot of intense light in order to create it.
Yeah, and I think if you did enlarging, it would be like blurry edges. You know what I mean?
Right.
It wouldn't be like super sharp and crispy. Could be wrong. Haven't tried it yet. Could be.
Oh, that might take a year or two. The amount of light an enlarger puts out.
Well, the process looks fun as it is now anyway. Seeing you create those prints is really cool. And you can go from, you had little tiny prints to, what's the biggest print you've made?
I have made a 16 by 20 with an 11 by 17 negative.
Okay.
But I've been looking into, that's what I really, really wanted to do for this show, is like big life-size saguaros. So don't anybody steal my idea, because that's what I want to do next.
Oh, man. But now everybody's going to go out and try that.
Yeah. Don't put that on the podcast.
Cut that part out.
No way.
But they sell rolls of that inkjet film for like t-shirt shops, and you can get it up to, I've seen like 50 something inches wide by like 100 feet long. So that's something I'd really like to get into. As long as you have an inkjet printer that can print that width, you can make negatives that big, which I think would be really cool.
And they have paper that is big like that too?
Yeah.
You just gave me an idea.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And he's got ideas now.
Yeah. I've seen people like attempt to do like a UV lamp and enlarger, but I haven't seen any like results from that really.
Pretty sure that would melt the negative.
I don't know. But it's, and that's the part of it too, is being able to experiment and like try stuff with this, I think you can with darkroom printing, you can solarize and whatever else, but this has so much that you can play with.
So what are some of these other things that people do to do their cyanotypes?
Hannah Mode, she takes glacier water and mixes the chemistry, or she has the paper underneath and she'll hang a block of glacier, like frozen glacier water, and let that drip onto the paper. So it's like this crazy cool abstract cyanotype of melted glacier water.
Wow.
Yeah. And she did a huge piece using dirt, I think, from a specific place, or sand, and she made constellations, and it's like the size of a wall, and it's the coolest thing. So I really like her stuff a lot. So again, back to creativity, like there's so much,
There's a lot you can do with it.
And then River Shepherd, I think she's in Louisiana. She does a lot of mixed media with like gilding and gold leafing and stuff like that, which ends up looking really cool. And then there's a method called wet cyanotype, which I've played with a little bit, but there's a woman, I can't remember her name, but she's really, really cool. It does, the cyanotypes are basically iron salts. So if you can get anything that'll interact with iron, you can get crazy colors, and like you spray it down with water and it almost looks like this neat watercolor picture. So that's another really cool example I've seen.
And it's on watercolor paper typically, so you could go back in and
people do that too. Yeah, they'll hand watercolor paint sections in. So I've seen a lady that does, again, botanical things, and she'll go back in and hand paint with watercolor make the flowers colored. It's really pretty.
So you just mentioned a bunch of cyanotypists. I don't know, what do you guys call yourselves? Cyanotypies.
Type-I.
Hippies.
Nature freaks.
Who is your favorite, or who is the one on the cutting edge of this funny enough old technology? Who do you like the most, or who's doing crazy stuff that you love?
I can't remember his name. There's a guy that does really wild stuff. He'll like load up water guns with chemistry and it's really crazy. Or he'll fill water balloons and throw them at the paper, and it's very creative. And then he did one where like people would walk by and either like throw something at it, or like it was their footsteps, or they're very interactive, which I think is really rad. You like have this almost community art piece of, people having their own little hand in it. And he does stuff with like glitter, like exposed glitter, which is cool because it like will refract in different ways, and then it'll go through different pieces of glitter in different ways. If it's like red or clear, or so he'll mix it up. But Hannah Mode, I think, is my favorite, like I mentioned with the glacier water, just because that's kind of up my alley too, because she does a lot of conservation work, and she uses that to represent, like, hey, pay attention to climate change, like this is what's happening, like, so it's a cool mix.
So there's you mentioned, as far as community goes, there is a community that both is a conservationist and is really into cyanotypes. Do you guys like have club meetings and stuff like
I
that?
wish. Maybe that's something I should start.
Yeah.
There is, it's called the Conservation Artists something, but you do like pay a membership, and that's like, photography or anything, not just cyanotypes artists. But yeah, that's a pretty big one. But no, I should, because Hannah Mode's one of the only ones that I've kind of seen do that combination as well. But I'm sure there's probably others out there. Southern California seems to have a few too. There's like one or two in LA, but it's again like images of plants, like botanical photograms, or like sunglasses or something. Like, it's like hipster sort of like LA influencer type. I don't know. Do it for the gram cyanotypes. I don't
know. What is next? Is there a different level that you want to reach with the art and being the I'm obsessed that you're like a conservationist. I mean, you guys are like going the way of the dodo bird in certain aspects, as far as some of us, it just seems like more and more people don't really care about. I know you talk a lot about staying on the trail, sort of thing. Which I did not realize was as big a deal until I started seeing what you were posting, and it's like, oh, well, that's not good.
Yeah. Just on that end, I feel like an environmental extremist a lot of times. And when I first really started getting into being active about it, I didn't I couldn't find the balance between like being frustrated with it and then like educating people. And it's still like this really fine line of, you know, how do I tell you that this is not okay and try to make you understand why? But then when you immediately block me after that, like that's just arrogance and that's just your ego. But yeah, it's honestly like you said, a lack of knowledge. And I find that more and more. And there's a ecologist from, I think he went to Berkeley, Charles Post, and he said something that really helped me was to always be the student. And that was a teaching that he learned from someone else. So like, I think back to, I didn't always know not to build cairns. And that's what I posted the other day. You know, you build these rock stacks and people get off trail and can get lost. Now, being an avid hiker, I know that if a cairn's in the wrong place, I'm wandering off into the wrong section of the superstitions, unless, you know, you have a GPS that I can't afford. Right. So, but yeah, it's, and that's something I kind of want to tie in to begin with this show, is just to show people what's out there. And like I posted the other day about this tiny, again, little flower that's no bigger than a dime. And literally people were stacking rocks right around where that little flower was. And it's the only one I've seen in that range.
Oh, wow.
That grows right there. And, you know, somebody's kid or even, you know, an adult could have like smashed it with a rock and that would have been done. And you destroy that chance for that plant to populate that area, you know, and that could be it. Game over. You won't see that plant anywhere else.
Yeah.
Because it was right there.
Right. And especially with, you know, these plants that are really rare and don't do well
and
out there.
If you can't recognize that and you can't distinguish species and you're not a botanist and you're out, you know, taking pictures and laying in wildflowers like the super bloom has seen recently.
Ouch.
You know, I mean, it's like, again, a knowledge thing, but and I don't fault people for not knowing things. But again, if I like try to say, hey, like nature's awesome, let's take care of it. And this is kind of down another venue, but it's hard because, like I've said, people are starving in downtown Phoenix. So how do you justify being upset at people going off trail when, you know, there are so many what seem like bigger problems going on in the world?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we're all reliant on nature. Like we're all reliant on our ecosystems and those functioning, and those are getting wrecked and we're feeling the effects of it already. Like, yeah, we have food systems and we have intensive agriculture, but you have to have land to do that. Like even still, I mean, we're seeing repercussions from this already. And especially in Arizona, like you can kind of, you know, see drought wise or flash floods, things like that. I mean, if you take up land that would otherwise help mitigate those things, I mean, the I-10 is flooding. Like, yeah. Like it's kind of a stretch, but I mean, hopefully my idea is that showing people these things exist. So many people think the desert's a wasteland and they think there's nothing out here. And like, they're like, well, it's all beige. There's nothing here. Like, you know, and I think that mentality carries through with let's just tear it up because it's a wasteland and there's nothing out here anyways. So for me presenting, like I've identified 68 different species in the McDowell Mountains just this past spring.
Wow.
Yeah. And people think that the desert's all creosote, saguaro, cholla, like, you know, it's what we have. But there are wildflowers, there are vines, there are like morning glories, there are all kinds of plant species out there. And wildlife rely on those plant species. So it's this whole cascade, you know, of life depends on, you know, this system. But yeah, if we just tear it all up, you don't have any of that anymore.
Do you find that your artwork and your photography and your alternative process helps more or less facilitate the educational process to, well, help people be more aware of the beauty in the wasteland?
I would like to, and I think that's the idea with Uncultivated is, hey, look at what we have, you know, look at what's out there, look at what we could be losing. But I think in future things, I would like to focus more on that aspect in the new things that I do and works later on. I have a couple of concepts right now based around like the land that's being developed and how that just gets kind of, I mean, even with, like I said, the native plant laws, you still see saguaros getting chopped up and taken out and, you know. So I think the next thing that I do will definitely be more focused around like conservation, education. But for this point right now, just showing people and getting it out there and saying, look at this. So it hopefully will instill in people an appreciation for what we have. And not, you know, and then even where they're from, if they're not from here, to think about, oh, well, what native plants do I have where I live? You know, and the Sonoran Desert, you know, and deserts in America are so unique and so amazing anyways. Things have adapted to this harsh, crazy environment, and they're walking this line of survival already. And they don't need us to push them over the threshold to not be able to make it anymore. But hopefully just seeing like, wow, we have desert chicory, or wow, we have this crazy weird vine that has this super strange seed pod, you know, and that'll get people's excitement up about botanical things here. And know, like, there are things out there that we don't even know exist yet.
Yeah. Now, bringing in the doom and gloom here, aside from the beauty that that we would lose in case these plants get eradicated, what do we know? What kind of real environmental impact the loss of these plants will do to us, even though they're just out in the middle of nowhere? Or seemingly out in the middle of nowhere.
I was going to say South Mountain is a good example, and McDowell is there. South Mountain's in the city. You go up there and you see wildflowers now. Like I said before, it's levels of things. So, you know, you have plants are autotrophs, right? They make what they are with the sun, right? They make their food. Other things feed on plants, then other things feed on those animals. So that's the building block, right? So bees, I mean, we kind of need those guys. Yeah. And that's a good example of, you know, a public campaign that has really raised awareness about how important something so small is. And ideally, you know, if we could do that for what we all depend on. But yeah, if we lose these plants, it's not just, oh, well, we don't eat that plant, we don't need it. Yeah. It's not, well, it's not cotton, so why keep it? It's an ecosystem, more of like a holistic viewpoint, you know, a macro thing is, well, the way ecosystems function, you lose those plants, then you lose the wildlife. So wildlife doesn't have anything to eat. And then you lose clean water, clean air. I mean, it's hard to describe because it's really like a complex system.
But it's not a good thing.
No. It's hard to translate kind of somewhat scientific concepts like that, because it's like, well, because it's important, you know, like, yeah. Duh. Because for me, it's kind of a no-brainer. Like, I mean, yeah, we can farm everything, but like One Strange Rock, like that show that's on Netflix now, I highly suggest people watch that show, because it talks about how like the sandstorms across the ocean bring all that nutrients across to the rainforests. And like the rainforest depends on a lot of that nutrients, and then the rainforest makes their own weather. They make their own clouds. Like there's jet streams. There's these whole big functioning systems that we can't even grasp yet that depend on having this land that's not tampered with. So yeah, we can tear everything down and have coffee, or like we can do that. Yeah, great. But the way things function to maintain the climate, to maintain balance, to maintain what we have, once you build everything and turn it all into condos, you don't have those checks and balances, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we, you know, hunt pronghorn and bighorn sheep for fun mostly now, but you know, that really was what we subsided on for a long time, was what was out there. And now back to the idea of like there being a veil of us depending, you know, thinking our chicken nuggets, where they come from, like out of a machine, like
yeah.
So, if you rely on the land, and we've lost that connection as a society. I think not all of us, obviously, like native tribes know that.
Mm-hmm.
You depended on corn. Like things were almost a religious status. They were, like the Aztecs with corn, So, yeah, you can have intensive agriculture and farming and hydroponics, and you can get all into that. And there's two whole schools of thought on, well, technology will save us, or, let's protect what we have. But I personally don't want to live in a Blade Runner type world. So, I mean, I think everybody, to go outside, there's very few people I know that don't want to go outside, I guess, but I mean, where do you go? Like every kids go camping and people take their kids out in nature. And like, there's evidence that looking at green and being around plants makes you more relaxed, and helps your mental well-being. So there's this deep seated connection that I think we've kind of forgotten.
It's like a privilege, but it's also a responsibility.
Yeah. But yeah, as far as like losing it all, I mean, things are already ceasing to function the way they should, or, idealistically should.
Right.
I mean, you're seeing, flooding and drought, and it's all interconnected, which is hard to make people see.
And that's why you take pictures and show them.
Try to. Yeah. That's hard too. Is like, well, that's great that this is a wildflower, but what good does it do me? Like, well, there's some bees that live off of that, also pollinate our pecan grove around the corner.
It's not just about the honey.
That's a whole different story. Delicious bee puke.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I hogged up all the questions, Daniel.
I think you got all of them.
Yeah. Well, I was just fascinated. It's easy to get, once you start chipping away at the photography and the background on it, it's just the whole encyclopedia and volume as to why documenting.
Talk a lot.
Oh no, that's the background again. Why it's necessary to.
I've got one good question.
Oh, no.
What's the big takeaway from your show? What do you feel you want to get across to the viewer? And if there's one thing that everybody can start doing to better conserve or protect our wilderness and nature.
Stop rolling around in wildflowers. No, I'm just kidding.
That's easy.
Yeah.
I not as like one simple thing. Well, I guess just being mindful is pretty simple, which, like you said, staying on trail or something like that. But I'm kind of a big proponent for like a leave no trace type mindset. So as far as public lands go and conservation, like be mindful and be respectful of the land. Leave no trace is kind of like based around 7 principles, and it gets into a question of ethics, and I'm getting really off topic again, but I think just, treat it. I can't say treat it as your own, because some people don't care about their own stuff, but
it's not a theme park. It's not,
yeah,
it wasn't created for the amusement of people to like
that it's a living
trample.
Thing, and that, that you have an impact, I guess, and that your footsteps matter where you are. Yeah, narrowing it down to one thing is just that.
Working on understanding it better, maybe?
Yeah, my takeaway on it is that as an idiot, my idiot point of view is that the dirt is organic. The dirt is real. It just because it's dirt doesn't mean it has no function. And that's looking at your posts and looking at things like the off-roaders, that I think that's one of the things, if they would start realizing that the dirt is
It's alive.
it's real, it's
literal
tangible, so
bedrock.
yeah. I think
Foundational.
that if people start at that point, like, it's just not just, the sand that you buy at Home Depot to build your little sandbox.
Yeah.
It's stuff grows because of it. That's one of the takeaways that I got from here, or that I'm getting. It's like, don't mess with the dirt.
And put it on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
And like that translates back into like education and just knowing. And it's hard for me because, like I said, my brain is in that, and I horticulture, have a horticulture degree and knowing all that stuff that's going on. But that's really awesome to hear that it makes sense, because for me to translate those kind of concepts is kind of difficult. But yeah, I think just that education and opening people's eyes to like what is going on outside in nature, in public lands. Like, I mean, some people are city people and they don't, I guess, really care, but but once you get out there and once you see what's going on and you see life and you see, this tiny itty bitty flower that is surviving in this harsh environment, like, it's mind blowing. I think it's just amazing. But the takeaway, I think, would be to open people's eyes to that, and maybe respect. I think maybe respect would be a good takeaway. It's not just, like you said, people often see it as this dead, not dead, but this inanimate object, or, plants, even, they don't get the same respect as pandas. People like they are this
whales.
like characteristic, like charismatic little, beings, or, we have Save the Bats. You fight with things, people don't like snakes either.
Right.
But,
save the cute animals, the ugly ones.
Yeah, kind of.
Bleep the ugly
ones. Yeah. I should put one of the beep sounds in there. Yeah, I think that plants don't get that same level of understanding, and like people like houseplants. Millennials like houseplants, apparently. But to show people, like, this is what's growing here in our desert, like, this is what we have, like, these things are amazing, and we need to respect that, or else you're not going to have it anymore. But that respect just plays back into, kind of, I'm a big proponent of that in general. So having it for the land, I think, is really important.
All right.
Yeah. I can ramble for days.
I'm sure you can.
We're going to get on the photographer ethic.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Don't do it for the gram. Don't do it for
I'm thinking you should have your own podcast on, there's just volumes and volumes of information that needs to be put out there.
I keep telling her that.
There's a podcast called In Defense of Plants. That's pretty good. But they do a lot of, they focus on somewhat rare. God, it's just this like cascade of things. Like, there's these herbalists, like the witchy thing is trendy now, like, I'm a witch, like, and people are going out and pulling creosote and white sage. Oh my gosh, they busted like a literal tractor trailer of white sage that was illegally harvested.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because all these hipster chicks, no offense, I'm sorry, because all these certain people want to buy like white sage bundles. It's like trendy, and like, that's sacred to native peoples. It's sacred white sage, and Palo Santo is another one. And like, it's trendy now to have sage bundles. So people are making hand over fist illegally harvesting white sage, and the population's getting decimated. So it's like, and cactus poaching. Oh my gosh. On the black market, cactus, outrageous.
Really?
Yes. People will go out, if you find like a population and certain people find out about it, you go back out there and it's holes in the ground. And they've taken, especially smaller ones that you can get out, like saguaros are a little harder, but literally they'll steal saguaros from Saguaro National Park. The national park is now microchipping saguaros so they can track them. Yes. Nice. So they can track them.
Wow. Get them.
Because they fetch so much money on the black market.
Wow.
Yeah. There's just like insane amounts of things that are going on.
So with the growth of the popularity of being out in nature, people are making money out on these trends. So maybe consider the trends that you're following an important thing to consider, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, again, that goes back into like respect and being mindful, because nobody questions where things come from. Not really. You know, I mean, some people do. If you think, where does my food come from? Where do my shoes come from? You know, where did this white sage bundle come from?
I am so So the irony is that you're supposed to be doing that for spirituality reasons, and you're destroying the thing that you're supposed to be spiritual about.
Yeah, it's a world of irony.
What is
that is the super bloom irony. Sense. Like, I love nature and you're rolling in poppies. Like,
yeah.
It's ego. It's totally ego.
Yeah.
Because you want it and you're not willing to not have it to preserve something. So, which again plays back into respect for. But yeah, it's just like there's a million different things that I could get into about. But yeah, and
like for another podcast, Danny.
Yeah,
with photography too, like like maternity photos. Oh man, and engagement photos, and yeah, the superstitions are a mess because people just wander off in the desert again because they think it's wasteland, and they're not. Okay, you want to know something else fun? There's cryptobiotic soil here, right? That takes forever to develop.
The kind that steals the power from Superman?
Yeah. Yeah. It's bright green and glows. You know?
Wow.
Kryptonite soil. But it's like, it's this living thing. It's living soil, and you'll see signs. Why do they call it
crypto then? Doesn't that mean dead?
Does it mean cryptic?
Crypto.
Like, anyways, it's up in Utah, and they have signs like, don't bust the crust, is what they say.
But it's living dirt.
Yes. It's cryptobiotic soil. It's like living, and it develops, and it's like you step on it and it's the end. Like, it took eons for that to come about, and we have it here. Like, I've seen it. So people think, well, it's just rocks. I'm going to wander off in the... No, it's not. Like, there are living things all around you. And that's why we have trails, and that's why it's a big deal. But yeah, I mean, like, photographers will go just wander out in the desert for that, you know, lost out in the... I've seen people in, like, evening gowns out in the superstitions. Like, like to hike in, and I don't know. They want that shot on the cliff with the, you know...
I don't think there's anything wrong with going out into nature and getting those shots, but what's important is you're mindful of these things and considerate and playing by the rules. I mean, you know, it's important that we protect these things that we're utilizing for ourselves.
I'm not saying don't go take your maternity photos out at the superstitions. Like, it's gorgeous and people need to appreciate it. Like, duh, you should appreciate it. But when you're like walking wherever you want, and when someone tells you why that's not a good idea, and then there's no response, or they come back at you with scripture.
See, now I'm glad I hate hiking. I don't mess with that.
So, like, from your viewpoint, like, why do you think it's important? Like, you just said you hate hiking.
I get tired. I'm fat and I'm out of shape, and then I got to carry out my gear with me if I go like for portraits. And I'm like, no, why don't we just?
I'm not an on location guy.
A green screen. We'll just do a green screen.
Green screen it. Good fashioned gray background works for me. How about you? You know,
drop in the soups in the background.
Yeah, or go to the park. Let's just go to the park. No, dude, I really want to go to Dutchman's or Tortilla
Dutchman.
Flats.
Yeah.
I'm like, nah, I'm good, cool. And you know. How far do you want to walk? I'm like, I think we're there, man.
About 30 feet from the car.
It's like we're not even out of the parking lot yet.
Just do them right here. We'll crop like waist up with the background.
I'll go out and take a picture of the mountains and then, you know, superimpose you, man.
Good enough.
On that cliff edge. I mean, like, you see my posts and, you know, obviously read and listen, and you're seeing that it is alive, but why does that matter to you, or does it? Like, does it matter if we have South Mountain Park to you, or? Well,
yes, I do. I don't want to mess up nature. That's not my place. when I do hike once every 10 years, I don't roll off the trail I just like, why would I go off? There's snakes out there.
That's what I'm saying, for your own protection.
And, but I didn't realize up into your post how much of a problem it is for people that do go off trail. And of course, I didn't realize how big of a problem it was off-roading. I've been off-roading with my buddies, and he's always like on the trail, on the off-road trail. And I'm like, let's go over there. And he's like, we probably don't, we shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, cool. And I just thought it was something like, he just didn't want to, but he's more savvy about staying on the trail.
Yeah.
And from that point, like, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I didn't think it was a problem, but knowing now that there's wildlife out there, not just animals, but plants and things that are important to the ecosystem, that I personally don't need to go about messing around in that. And, I already, I'm not going to go off the trail. And again, the good part is I'm not really a landscape photographer in that sense either. I'm not going to go look for the beautiful lost, rose, the desert rose out there or anything like that. That's just, it's not fascinating to me. But yeah, there are photographers out there that'll wait for the perfect shot and go out there and maybe mess around, which I think is going back to the sage thing. I think it's funny that the photographers go out there looking for a great nature shot, but to and from the shot, they may be messing with the nature that they want to.
Their tripods in the middle of a creosote bush or brittle bush.
Yeah. And I think it needs to come back to where, yes, we do want to get a photograph, but is it really worth it killing the rest of the wildlife to get there to do it, and it's just a different perspective from my viewpoint too, where I didn't think about, all right, well, if I want to go look for a shot, I need to be mindful about where it is I step to get there. And it's just like, in my mindset now, it's just let the photographers that know what they're doing do their job, or do, whether it's documenting or creating art, let them do it. Their photograph is probably going to be better than mine anyway. So
I think that's what's hard to communicate for me. Like you ask about a simple point, but like for me, it's kind of a no-brainer, because that's how I've been all my life, is like knowing that these things, I don't know, maybe I watched Pocahontas too many times when I was a kid, but like it's all living and it's all out there for a reason, and I didn't grow up in a city. So it's hard for me to like talk to somebody from South Phoenix that grew up, their whole life. Like, why should they care? And it's really hard for me to put that into words and to like explain, to go, well, because it is like, and that's, you have to make these arguments. And the best thing that I know how to do is to show people. And that's what I hope to do with Uncultivated, is kind of, hey, this is what's out there. Like, maybe bring that appreciation around, or maybe not. Maybe they'll just go graffiti on the rocks out there. I don't know, but
we hope they don't.
But yeah, that's the hope, is that interest, and to spark that kind of admiration and respect for stuff. But I guess it's like why, in your head, why is it worth it to try to save, I guess?
Save the plants?
Yeah, or just land,
well, that's what I was asking before. Like, what? It sounds catastrophic if we lose the plants that we don't care about because we don't know what they do.
Yeah.
And while, again, it seems so, someone who's uneducated, it seems so trivial. Like, well, it's just a little tiny flower. Who cares?
But that flower could be the cure to cancer.
Yes. And then that flower, it could potentially feed something else that is cure something else too. And it's just the ignorance that needs to be, purged But you go into talking about ego and being blocked because you want to spread a little bit of knowledge and education, like, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that, I find that very aggressive.
Me or them?
No, them. Very aggressive to a very aggressive response to something that needs to be there's something that people need to be educated on. And
yeah.
Right now, we live in these crazy times where, some of us, and I use us in the editorial way, some of us don't believe in climate change. Some of us don't believe that that the earth is dying, which I find fascinating. And
that end to me is observation. Like, again, just even on a short time scale, again, back to the super bloom, you can see in 2 weeks the havoc that's been wreaked out there in California, and how, like, they're in aerial shots of that park where all the wildflowers are blooming and people are walking wherever they want. It's insane, the difference. So just seeing even something in as short as 2 weeks, and I can only think about what happens in 10 years when people are walking around, or, like, as far as climate change or anything else, it's observation. You see, things are changing around us, and you can argue why. It can be natural phenomenon, or regardless. But
last question, then I'll stop bugging you. But do you have an optimistic or pessimistic view as to where we are headed?
It depends on the day. Depends on what happened that morning. I have a friend that's looking at soil in Arctic regions, and that makes me depressed because of the evidence that we're finding coming out of that. As far as, even if it's not man-made, the climate is changing. And that, to me, is that can get me kind of down, because it's kind of a, dystopian future that you're looking at, for real.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a drive. I think that should be a driver for change. So yeah, I definitely do have my moments where I'm like, well, this is kind of hopeless, and why am I worried about this creosote bush when it's not going to exist in 20 years? Like, why am I worried about Joshua trees when it's going to be too hot for them? But I think, again, like I said, that's drive. If we don't do anything, if you can change something, why would you not? Like, if you can do something about it, shouldn't you? So that's kind of keeps my positivity, is that I think I can't sit by, I'm not going to just sit there and not do something and just either be lazy or not care, or just let everything go to hell, because that's what they say is going to happen. Or, party like it's 1999 until it does. Like, I don't know. For me, it's a motivator. I have my down days, but it's motivation. It always rounds back out to motivation to change.
Nice.
All right.
Yeah, keep rambling.
I'm sure we could go for several more hours. All right. Well, that's a lot. It's a lot to digest. I'm excited for your show. Thanks. And excited to see the community's response to your work and conservation, and kind of see where that leads us, where we go.
If people are like, oh, that's a pretty flower, and walk away.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of positivity there, and I'm excited to see your work up on display. So
thank you.
We appreciate you joining us this evening for episode 3 featuring Wildrootage and Danny De La Cruz. You can visit us online at www.phxfilmrevival.com or on our Instagram at phxfilmrevival. Thank you, and let's keep it on the trail.